see some comments of people saying the hardest form for them to make on the potter's wheel is to make a teapot. So in this tutorial, I'll be explaining in details how to produce one. But firstly, you must have it in mind that making a teapot has to do with so many dimensions, measurements, calculations, and balance. And also making sure that your measurement actually fits the teapot you're actually producing. So as seen in this video, I'll be making a little teapot with the complete components that makes up a complete teapot. That is the spout and the lid, and the handle will be attached later on after trimming. After making sure the clay was very well centered on the wheel, I proceeded with making some pulls. But when pulling the wall for a teapot, you must make sure that you leave enough clay at the top for making the gallery. And also you should have in mind that pulling the walls of a teapot, you don't have to make very tall cylinder just like when you're making a vase. You just have to make a very little cylinder, then you start shaping it to the size of teapot you intend to produce. So as seen here, you see that I wasn't okay with the first shape of the teapot, so I now had to budge it the more, that is pushing my inner hand towards the outside while the outside hand supported. So after I was now okay with the shape, proceeded to making the gallery. Apparently it seems to be that making galleries for teapots or for any other wheel thrown piece that will have to get a gallery, something like a gallery. So just keep an eye on what I actually described here in this video with my fingers, the illustrations I did with my fingers. So making a gallery can be done in different ways as it suits you, or as you can do it very perfectly yourself. So as seen previously, for the sake of this tutorial, I used the wooden rib tool, while my middle finger from my left hand guided the gallery beneath, giving the curvature, that flow that a teapot gallery is supposed to have beneath it. So the next step after making the gallery is to make sure you mop up the teapot gallery. You take out the excess water that might still be inside the teapot. You make sure you take it out very well with this tool you see me here using. Then the next step is to make sure you are seen here. You see I utilize a broomstick for measuring the inner flange and the outer flange for making the teapot's lid. So after making sure the measurements were very accurate, I now proceeded to making the teapot's lid. But also you can as well use a caliper to measure the inner and outer flange before you produce them, because if you don't produce them, for this here you cannot do any head knowledge for getting the measurement for making the lid for the teapot. So immediately I was satisfied with the shape of the teapot, the gallery, and I had to cut it out from the wheel. Proceeded to making the lid for the teapot. As well, you just have to measure a small amount of clay and center. You must also have in mind that for this, you are also not going to pull a very tall cylinder, just like when you were producing the teapot itself. So what you just have to do is just pull the clay up to an extent, then you firmly push it inside, then you continue like that. Once you push, you measure until it falls in alignment with your previously measurement you get. So once you are done with that, you have to use the measurement you took initially and test it if it falls in the measurement you took initially. So if it doesn't fall in, you have to continue the process until it falls in the exact measurement you took. So to ensure this, just like what I used here, you see that I used a broomstick, right? So what I actually did was to use my eyesight to get the measurement I took with the broom. So I finally achieved the measurement. So the measurement finally fell in alignment with the measurement I took. So I had to clean it up with this plastic material. Then I used this foam material to take off the excess water that was inside the lid. As well, I used the wooden rib tool to give it another cut before cutting it out from the wheel. The final component to throw when making a teapot is the spout. So the spouts can sometimes be very snaky. So as seen here, I'm also constantly improving my throwing skills with different pulls. If you look the style of pulling I did here for pulling the spout, it was actually different from the one I used when pulling the teapot and the lid. So here what you have to do we're making the spout with a smaller clay. You mount it on the wheel. That is based as well. That will be based on the size of spout you intend to produce. That is the height of spout you intend to produce. So you have to, once you mount it, you now have to pull a little cylinder upwards. Then you compress it just as seen in this tutorial. So you just have to compress it until you have that size of spout you intend to produce. Once you're satisfied with the shape of the spout, then you can cut it out from the wheel and place on the board where the teapot and the lid are allowed to set before trimming. So here is a display of this. Video was actually just for the sake of this. So here is actually a display of how it turned out. It fits into the teapot that was made mainly for it, and then you see how the lid fit into the teapot itself. So these are the steps for making a teapot. Thank you for watching.